Welcome to Lesson 17, Building the Business Model and Mapping Layer of a Repository. The business model and mapping layer, usually the middle layer when viewing the semantic model using the Oracle Business Intelligence Administration tool, performs two functions. It defines the logical dimension of business model for your business intelligence system. It maps the logical columns within this business model to the physical columns in the physical layer of the semantic model. Now, your semantic model can contain multiple business models within this layer. Something that typically happens when you want to report across multiple source systems but your data sets are not well integrated. Your long-term objective, though, should be to have a single integrated, or what they sometimes term as conformed business model, so that users can easily create analyses that span multiple subject areas using common dimensions. The business model and mapping layer of the administration tool can contain one or more business model objects. A business model object contains the business model definitions and the mapping from logical to physical table sources for the business model. The main purpose of the business model is to capture how users think about their business using their own vocabulary. To build the business model and mapping layer of a repository, you perform the following steps. You create a business model, examine logical joins, examine logical columns, examine logical table sources, rename logical objects manually, rename logical objects using the rename wizard, delete unnecessary logical objects, and finally create simple measures. Okay, the business model and mapping layer of the administration tool has too many categories of tables. And these are logical tables that I'm referring to here. There are fact tables and dimension tables. Logical fact tables contain the measures by which an organization gauges its business operations and performance. And the logical dimension tables contain the data used to qualify the facts. Now, to build the business model and mapping layer, we'll go ahead and start by right-clicking the white space in the business model and mapping layer and selecting the new model to open the business model dialog box. Right click the white space in the business model mapping layer and select new business model to open the business model dialog box. Enter paint in the name field and leave the disabled flag checked. Click OK. Then the paint business model is added to the business model and mapping layer. Now in the physical layer, select the 4 alias tables by holding down your shift key and clicking each of the alias tables one by one, and then drag them and drop them onto the newly created business model called paint. This is how you move the alias tables from the physical layer to the business model and mapping layer. Now notice that the 3-dimensional tables have got the same type of icon, but the fact table has got a different type of icon. This pound sign or hash icon indicates that this is a fact table. This kind of helps you determine quickly as to which table contains all the measures that are necessary in doing the different aggregations that you may have to do for your requirements. Right-click the Paint Business Model and select Business Model Diagram, whole diagram. To open the business model diagram, if necessary, rearrange the objects so that the joint relationships are visible and which in this case we already have them appearing visibly. Because you drag all tables simultaneously from the physical layer onto the business model, the logical keys and joins are created automatically in the business model. This is because the keys and join relationships were already created in the physical layer. However, you typically do not drag all physical tables simultaneously, except in very simple models. Later in this lab, you will learn how to manually build logical keys and joins in the business model and mapping layer. The process is very similar to building joins in the physical layer. Double-click any one of the joins in the diagram to open the logical join dialog box. In this example, I will show you how to click the join that was created between the D4 time dim table and F1 fact FCT table. You select the join, double-click on it, and this opens the logical join relationship dialog box. Notice that there is no join expression at the bottom here. Joins in the BMM layer are logical joins. Logical joins express the cardinality relationships between logical tables and are a requirement for a valid business model. Specifying the logical table joins is required so that the Oracle BI server has necessary metadata to translate logical requests against the business model into SQL queries against the physical data sources. Logical joins help Oracle BI server understand the relationships between the various pieces of the business model. When a query is sent to the Oracle BI server, the server determines how to construct physical queries by examining how the logical model is structured. Examining logical joins is an integral part of this process. The administration tool considers a table to be a logical fact table if it is at the many end of all logical joins that connect to the other logical tables. We'll go ahead and click OK to close the logical joins dialog box, and then we'll also go ahead and click the X to close the whole diagram for the BMM layer. In this part, we'll go ahead and examine the logical columns. We'll do that by expanding all the different tables so they can expose the logical columns. And expand the time and the fact table. Notice that all these logical columns were automatically created at the time that we were bringing over the tables from the physical layer to the business model and mapping layer. We'll also examine the logical table sources for the D4 time dimension table. I expanded the sources folder, and this exposes the D4 time dimension table source. And this D4 time dimension source, if I double click on it, you will notice that the column maps to the physical column for the alias table in the physical layer, which is the D4 time dimension table. On the General tab, we can rename the logical table source to LTS1, such as follows. And then we put the time. This will specifically identify which logical table source that maps directly to the physical table in the physical layer. Later on in the lab, I will explain a little bit more about aggregation content and how we group while we build the logical dimension hierarchies. For now, we'll go ahead and click OK to close the logical table source dialog box, and then we'll explore the remaining tables in the business model and mapping layer.